Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sunday Morning Fellowship. Happy Easter, and some say happy resurrection, but all the same, we thank the Father that Jesus died and he rose, and now we have the opportunity to become spiritually birthed by him. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joining us this morning, and I trust the Father that the things that he will reveal to us today, that we will take it. And if we don't understand it, we'll put it on the shelf, come back to it. But just asking Father to give us understanding and revelation in what He is saying to us, His spiritually birthed sons. So, with that, I want to open up with prayer. Father, I thank you that you brought us here today. Some of us are on Zoom, some watching through YouTube. But we trust, Father, that the message that you have given us will go out and that it will produce what you have in mind and intent for it to produce. We thank you. We praise you. Amen. Okay. What we're going to be speaking on today is who has bewitched you? And what I'm going to start out with is I'm going to read a little introductory. It's called The Gospel of Morality. The gospel of morality is a hard taskmaster. It keeps you on your knees and continually living in regrets. Just when you think you've mastered this gospel, bam, an unholy thought comes to your mind. You may curse the person out that cuts you off on the freeway. You have an argument with your spouse and you say hurtful words to them. And the list goes on and on. And before you know it, you're back at the altar, begging the Lord for forgiveness, vowing that you'll do better the next time. But as you're leaving the church, Sister so and so, she looks at you a funny way, or she doesn't speak to you the way that you thought she should have. And then you want to give her a piece of your mind. And you think, oh my God, here I go again. I'm back at the altar. It's a never ending merry-go-round of repentance and regrets. In Galatians 1:6-7, Paul says this to the believers: I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you in the grace of Christ to a different gospel, which is, in verse 7 says, which is not another, but there are some who trouble you and want you to pervert the gospel of Christ. Later in Galatians 3:6, he asks the Galatians, he says, O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed among you as crucified? This gospel was not another gospel of the same kind that was being preached to them, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, the true gospel of Christ can be declared, or it can be preached, or it can be spoken in different ways by different people. Because as the Father reveals to us in different ways, we may convey that message in our own way that He gives to us. But this is the thing: its truth must never be altered. Many born again believers are on the merry-go-round gospel of morality, and they attempt to get off, but they are simply too afraid. They're afraid that they'll lose their identity as a quote unquote good Christian, not only to themselves, but to others. So, my hope is that this message today will encourage those who are on this merry-go-round to trust the Father and to end this never ending ride and jump off into their identity as the spiritual son to the Father. So, with that, I'm going to begin. If you have the notes, thank you. Thank you so much, Jim. So, there was a time when in man made religion, good moral behavior was synonymous with being a good and upright Christian. But in this day and age, in man made religion, just about any and all behavior is acceptable. Everything from extramarital affairs, misappropriating of church funds, bribery, and anything else in between. And we have been seeing this in the news. There's some big churches out there that have been being exposed for the behavior that's been going on in leadership and on down. So, I mean, now it's so rampant. It was rampant then, but now because we having social media, the news, everything, it's right there in your face and you see it. No one can hide from it. Now, there was an earlier time in history when these actions would have been considered despicable and grounds for excommunication. But in this day and time, as long as the person asks for forgiveness from the congregation and that person appears to truly be repentant, all is forgiven and it's business as usual. Now, I'm not saying that there's no room for forgiveness, but know that we will reap what we sow, whether it's to the flesh or to the spirit. In Galatians 6:7-8, it says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that will he also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life." Now, from these verses, we can clearly see that Father doesn't take away our right to make a decision as to where we plant our seeds of thought and or desire. In James 1:14-15, it says, "But each one, when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed, then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death." That's James 1:14-15. Now, it doesn't matter if you are a believer or an unbeliever, you consider yourself saved or unsaved, a spiritual son, or whatever you consider yourself to be as far as spiritually. You're going to reap what you sow. But the good news is, as the Father's spiritually birthed son, the impact of what we will reap, my God, we don't have to suffer the impact to the degree that if you don't know who you are as a spiritual son is, would suffer. So I'm going to give you a little summarized background of Gnosticism. This is what was going on in the Church of Colossae. So Gnosticism, or as I will refer to as another gospel, had been introduced into the Church of Colossae. In Gnosticism, matter and thought were separated. It was believed that matter was evil, and so it formulated the idea that the possession of knowledge was the only requirement for salvation. This is why they did not attribute humanity to Jesus Christ, because to them, material things were evil. And we see this going on in the church today. We see, we think Gnosticism is died out, but no, it just presents itself in another form. And I'll get to that later on in the message. So another false teaching related to this was Docetism, which taught that the body of Christ was something that appeared material, but was in reality only spiritual. In other words, he only seemed to have a body. Now, there are many out there that ask, I have been asked, so you really believe the Bible to be true? You believe that it's real? You don't think that these are just stories that were made up? And I said to a person who asked me that, I said, if these are just stories or thoughts or something that a man or a group of men made up, my God, they came from another planet, because some of this stuff, it would be unbelievable in the natural. That's why you have to see it for what it is. It's spiritual. So I'm going to continue on here. Such a belief that the material was evil, this led to an immoral life. Since they believed the spirit was separate from the physical body, they ignored their responsibility for the actions done in the flesh. To them, all the secrets of God were in the mind or appeared in an immaterial identity. Now, the result was a complete denial of sexual and unrestrained indulgences in the body. They thought since the physical body is evil, it might as well do whatever it wants. And we have this going on not just in churches, but we have this going on in the world as a whole. We think, or not we, but it has been said. People say, well, you know what? In church, they say the devil made me do it. They don't want to take responsibility to what they decide to do. And in the secular or in the world, they don't even care who made them do it. They just like, hey, I'm going to do me. They say YOLO, which means you only live once, so you might as well do it. Now, but this idea, Paul, he refutes it in Colossians 2:9, where he says, in him, Jesus Christ, as he appeared on earth, dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. Now, some translations are translated closer to the wording of the original languages. Some translators translated thought, meaning the thought behind the Greek and or Hebrew word is expressed in English. And that's why I chose the NIV for this purpose, for a thought-to-thought expression. And I had to go to the Father on this because I said, Father, you know what I want to express, but I don't know exactly what translation to use. And so he led me to the NIV. So in Colossians 3:1-4, he says, since then, you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God, the Father. Then set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your new life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Now, I like that in using the word since, the translator is connecting the thought as a result of being raised with Christ, they are now to set their hearts on things above. The idea of being raised with Christ was introduced back in Colossians 2:12, where Paul used baptism to illustrate this spiritual reality. He says, having been buried with him, that's Jesus Christ, in baptism, in which you were also raised with him, this is Jesus Christ also, through your faith in the working of God who raised him from the dead. Paul is emphasizing what their new state of being or life is. Now, how the resurrection, being raised, develops into the ascension, being seated at the right hand of God, reveals how we are raised from death and the tomb through spiritual birth, now to being seated in union with Christ in the authority of the Father. But sadly, some people never leave the tomb of the past identity. And I say that with emphasis on the word the, because it's not their identity anymore. It's the past. And they continue to live in an identity that no longer exists. And I borrowed this from my brother Curtis, as expressed in the words of my brother Curtis, a phantom identity. Now, back in Colossians 2:20-23, Paul says this, therefore, if you died with Christ from the basic principles of the world, why As though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which all concern things which perish with the using, according to the commandments of men. These things indeed have an appearance of wisdom in self imposed religion, false humility, and neglect of the body, but are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. So now I'd like us to take a look at the definition of the word indulge. That word indulge means to yield to the desire of, to treat with excessive leniency, generosity, or consideration, to give free rein to take unrestrained pleasure in, or to gratify. In today's world, there are now just as many Christian 12-step self-help recovery and deliverance programs as there are secular ones. All of them, they have the same agenda, and that is to help the victim. And I say victim because everyone is a quote unquote victim of their disease. They help them to manage and control the urges of their addiction. In the case of the Christian programs, it is to be delivered from the power of Satan. Now, I'm not saying that these programs cannot help, but what I am saying is they never allow you to be separate from the original identity, or they never allow you to be separate from whatever the addiction is that you're trying to get rid of. And no, an addiction in itself is not bad. That it's the degree of control and power that the addiction has over the quality of a person's life that labels it as good or bad. So let's move on. Let's compare the two types of groups. Now, in the secular self-help, I'm going to use one that we're all familiar with, and it's Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I have been to many Alcoholic Anonymous meetings, and they all start out the same way. The typical introduction of the meeting begins like this. They'll say, "Hi, I'm so and so, and I'm an alcoholic." And everyone says, "Welcome, so and so. Welcome to AA." Then this person goes on to give a history of what led them to abuse alcohol, how it destroyed their life and those around them. Then they may go on to tell how they discovered AA. Now, even if the alcoholic never takes a drink again throughout his entire life, he still identifies himself as an alcoholic. They live with guilt and fear. They live with the guilt of the damage their drinking caused in the past, and the fear of the possibility of returning to a life of drinking if they ever take another drink. And there have been some there, and it's called Al Anon. They're the support. They have that same fear too. They never, the alcoholic never exchanges his identity as an alcoholic, and the support person, that's their support person, they never let them let go of that identity either. They will not allow themselves to be anything but an alcoholic. I have heard it say, "I am an alcoholic and I will die as an alcoholic." It's a sad thing because it masquerades itself as something that is liberating, a program that will liberate them, but all the while it keeps them in fear and bondage to the alcohol. Now, I've been to also some Christian deliverance programs, and they're pretty much on the same lines. They'll say, "Hi, I'm so and so, and I'm a sinner saved by grace." And they'll say, "Welcome." Now, the key thing is they'll say, like out loud, I'm a sinner. And then in the small voice, I'm saved by grace. That's to show a sign of humility. Now, the so called Christian self help program also keeps you in an identity that does not belong to you. Like I said, they'll say, you are a sinner, and in small, soft voice, but I'm saved by grace. Now it's you, Jesus, and your fellow brothers and sisters on this journey now. It's like having the footprints experience at your fingertips, except it's no longer just you and Jesus. When he says, when you've seen one set of footprints, that was when Jesus carried you. Now you have your fellow Christian brothers and sisters who can also carry you when you're too weak within yourself to walk this journey. But all your efforts in the flesh to overcome bad habits, addictions, or behavior, they have an appearance of wisdom, but they have no life in them because they keep you in an identity that no longer belongs to you, which in the end, no matter how hard you try, will eventually lead to regret, frustration, anger, and feelings of hopelessness. Fear will never, and I say it again, fear will never allow you to be free from the clutches of any bad habit or addiction. But the good news is this. In 2 Timothy 1:7, he says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And that sound mind is self-control. The word sound mind, it denotes good judgment, disciplined thought patterns, and the ability to understand and make right decisions. It includes the qualities of self-control and self-discipline. Now, the Father, he will not violate our right to make a decision to allow or not allow his identity to be expressed through our mortal bodies. In Colossians 3:5-10, and this is the NIV, Paul tells the believers to put to death the indulgences in the flesh or earthly nature. He says here, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly identity. This is sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desire, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must also rid yourself of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of or identity of its creator, which is the Father. Now, to put to death is a powerful statement. It literally means to make dead. It suggests that we are not to simply suppress or control the attributes of original identity, but to recognize and realize the original identity is dead to us. So that's what Alcohol Anonymous or any of the church programs, religious programs, they have self-help. It encourages you to suppress it or to control the urges, but it never recognizes that you can be completely rid of it. Now, because we still live in the original body of sin, we, the spiritual sons, have to keep the flesh in check. Now, in 1 Corinthians 9:27, I like how Paul says this. But now just imagine like a boxer, and you've seen how boxers were trained. I strictly discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached the gospel to others, I myself will not somehow be disqualified as unfit for service. So we have a part in this. It's not going to just happen just because we are now aware and know who we identify with, which is the Father. Now it says anger, rage, malice, blasphemy, filthy language, and lying all have to do with what comes out of your mouth. There's a saying out there that you are what you eat, but there's also a saying you become what you think. Now, people make excuses for their behavior. This is born again believers and unbelievers alike. And people will even go as far as to make excuses for other people's behavior. They say whatever comes to mind without restraint. They go off on people, telling little white lies or distorting the truth. They'll say, God knows my heart, and no man can judge me. But while this may be true, this does not give occasion to continue to live and walk in the original flesh identity. This nature does not coincide with our new spiritual nature. Like I said, you cannot live in two places at once. You have to decide which place you're going to live in. This is what will keep a person on the merry-go-round of morality and living in the illusion of a dead or phantom identity. In Proverbs 21:23, he says, whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from trouble. Now that sounds like we have to make a decision in this. James 3:2 says, for we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect or complete, finished, whole, mature man, able also to bridle or to restrain or check or keep in control the whole body. So you see how all this is tied in together. You can't just think and say whatever you want and expect the body to do something different. Now, these are the attributes in the nature of the spiritual son. In Colossians 3:12-14, it says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. 1 Corinthians 13, it might be second, 4-8 and 13 says, this is who we are. This is our attributes here. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. We don't keep a tab of what people did to us. It doesn't define who we are. You've heard that saying where it says, my past has made me who I am today. That is not true in itself. Your past does not. As spiritually birthed sons, our past is gone. It's over. It's not who we are. It doesn't define us. It's the identity of our Father who defines who we are. Love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Now, in that always trust, It's not saying that we always trust man, but we always trust the Father, that he knows what he is doing concerning us, and that we are a part of his purpose, his intents, his plan. That's what that always trust means. Love, it never fails. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Love is the Father. The essence of the Father is love. And now we, the spiritually birthed sons, have the Father's nature and essence, which is love. There are many born again believers who truly love the Father, but they are struggling to live in their new creation identity because they either do not understand spiritual birth, or they live in fear of letting go of who they are to themselves and who they are to others in the illusion of original identity. Change in your behavior is no match for overcoming the earthly identity with all its passions, lusts, and desires. Many believers live with the idea that behavior is the issue. But the real issue is, who do I identify with? It's not about behavior. Our mindset being set on things above, our behavior is a result of if we set our mind on these things above. You can either live in the illusion of the original flesh identity or the identity of the spiritual son to the Father. The decision is yours. Thank you so much for being here with me today. And I pray and trust that the message that was given today, Father, will give revelation, that this information will become knowledge to you, and from knowledge, understanding. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day. Amen.